We need to re-embody our souls, um, by which I mean we need to get our souls back into our bodies. One of the things, Bernie, that you have done for years is you've kept on dancing.
Yes.
You've done physical things. And one of the things about the spiritual bypassing is that people are often perfectly happy to leave their bodies behind and let them get unhealthy and so on. But in actual fact, in the traditions, one of the important things is that this is a temple that you're supposed to look after.
Yeah.
And that also
Yeah.
means that you're supposed to embody.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we always assume that some people have souls, and then everybody's supposed to have a soul. Again, in the traditions, a lot of people have said, and I believe this to be true, is that you keep your soul and it carries on if you've actually nurtured it. If you do nothing, it just evaporates like fairy dust when you pass on. So how do we actually do that? I think it's terribly important to start off just understanding that there is more to us that we can control. There's something that's greater than us than we know or can know. When I hear all the time people saying, what should I do? My view is not what should we do, it's how should we be? And we need a fundamental change in our rhythm and perspective. And the first of that is to develop a sense of wonder and awe. We need to understand that there are things we can't control. You cannot make God your slave, and that there's something more than us. But it's extremely hard for most of us now to get into the habit of going, oh my goodness, there really is something extraordinary.
Welcome back to Connecting with Coincidence. I'm Bernie Beitman, psychiatrist, and I'm interested in the future of humanity, as many of you know from having watched this podcast. And we have the pleasure today of speaking with a polymath, a man who knows a lot about a lot. He is a remarkable man, and I consider him a friend, which is a delight to be able to say, because he's got a good heart and a great mind, and he's kind of funny in his own way, as I hope you will see. He graduated in medicine from the Royal College London Hospital in the University of London. While a student, he developed a deep and abiding interest in the work of Carl Jung and spent 2 years training in psychotherapy. After graduation, he also attained a master's degree in biochemistry, a doctorate in cell biology, and trained in acupuncture and qigong in England and then in China. I'll give you some idea that this guy's done a lot. He's practiced, researched, and taught internal medicine, endocrinology, metabolic medicine for 14 years before the psychiatric training at the Bethlehem Royal and Maudsley Hospitals in London, and then had a research fellowship in neuroimaging at Johns Hopkins University Medical School in Baltimore. I don't know how he did all this stuff, but he did. While he was doing some of this, I was being a hippie on Haight Street and doing a psychiatric residency. So we have slightly different trajectories. But Richard, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show, and thank you for being with me.
Well, Bernie, thank you very much. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you. And how did I do so many things? I had a misspent and dissolute youth. That's all it was. And but I've always been a guy that wanted to see what was around the next bend.
And you keep doing it.
And I've always been interested in and also I've always been a little bit stubborn. I will remember I had the wife of a very senior colleague that I obviously won't name. You would know his name because he's in our field. And she had a particular problem, came to see me, and I wasn't able to help her very much. And about a year later, she came back and said, any new ideas? I said, well, now I have 1.5 shelves of books on your topic and an entire file cabinet on your topic. And I think I've got a new idea. And she said, nobody does things like that. And I said, well, I was upset with myself that I couldn't help you. This time around, I could. So that was nice. But that's always been my approach. So if I can't
Wow.
help, I'll try and figure it out.
And so we have a tough problem here, Richard. We have humanity on a self-destructive trajectory, and we're psychiatrists, and we try to help people who are harming themselves. So how do you imagine the future of humanity?
Well, I'm very glad that we're actually talking about this because I see a very bleak future unless we are able to do things. But I also have a couple of immediate thoughts, and then we'll get into the meat of what we want to discuss. You said my interest in Carl Jung. In one of his books, which is a great big thick thing and requires a lot of persistence, called Alchemical Studies, he actually talked about how life's problems can never be solved, but only outgrown. And I think that's what we need to be focusing upon is outgrowing problems. And it's one of the things I'd like to come back to a couple of times today, because something that has underlain a lot of my insights and work over the last several decades has been the fact that human beings are changing, and we have been changing for a very long time. The idea that we could say that we're all exactly the same as we were 2,000 years ago is simply not accurate. We've been changing physically, psychologically, socially. The subtle systems of the body have been changing. We're changing spiritually. We're changing physically. You know, the shape of the face has changed over the last 400 years.
No, I
Um,
didn't know that.
it's because we're eating softer diets. As a result, the shape of the jaw has changed. And that's kind of important because one of the things that we do in recognizing facial expressions
Mm-hmm.
is looking at shape of face. And there's um, some of these changes have just been happening gradually over time. Some have been accelerated tremendously with the appearance of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, between 2012 and 22, amongst adolescents, there was a tripling of depression and suicide,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
coincided with two things. The first was 50% of us having cell phones, and the second was the first part of COVID. But there are several other very important factors. You know, in the United States, 30% of children can't recognize facial expressions,
Wow.
which, and you can imagine as a therapist what the feedback from that is, because in order to learn how to understand other people's expressions, of course, is one of the things is what we refer to and as facial proprioception. Now, you're familiar with this, but the ability to experience your own face is one of the things that gives you feedback. You know how we do two tricks with people when they're depressed. One of them is to make them do a faux smile, you know, just for a moment, you know, just smile. I know it doesn't, you don't want to, but smile. And how they'll notice for just a second that they just transiently feel a little bit better. And the second trick is to get them to breathe first through one nostril, then the other, for 30 seconds. And when they breathe through the right nostril, their depression gets better for about 30 seconds. It's,
Wow.
again, you can't spend all day walking around going like this. It'll be a bit silly. But the point is, it's just to demonstrate. That's all you're doing in the therapy is to say, look, if I can do it for 30 seconds, you've just done it to yourself, actually. And if you can do it for 30 seconds, next time we'll do it for a minute, and then we'll do it for 3 minutes, and then and so on and so forth. But there are many other very rapid changes that have occurred in people. You know, under the age of 17, most people can't tell the time. And you say, well, who needs to? You have one of these things, you know, you can just look it up. But the problem is that when you learn to tell the time, you learn the progression, you also learn fractions. And so you learn quite a number of things. And there are many other important cognitive changes that have occurred very rapidly in people, as well as some of these physical changes. And if we don't factor in some of these changes in people, I think we can be barking up the wrong tree.
And how, go ahead, keep talking.
Well,
Talking about
if I may,
factory.
I'd like to say a little bit more about that.
Please.
Because about just over a year ago, I went to a wonderful conference in London, which was actually entitled The Future of Humanity. It was organized in part by a mutual friend of ours, David Lorimer, and the main speaker was Ian McGilchrist, and there were two other fantastic speakers as well. Ian McGilchrist is a very interesting person. Bernie, you know him, your listeners may not. He was an English scholar, then was a late entrant to medicine, became a psychiatrist, and he's a philosopher. And I have to say, is one of the three smartest people I've ever met, and has written extensively on the differences between the two sides of the brain, and not in what they do, but how they perceive the world. And interestingly, you've teased me sometimes about the work I did at Johns Hopkins on brain imaging. But in actual fact, Ian and I co-authored a couple of papers on that topic. And he had done some of the spade work before I arrived to look at differences in how the world is perceived. And I think it's worth just saying a word about this, because his view is that, particularly since the Enlightenment, the way in which the two sides of the brain look at the world has changed. And it's changed at other times in history. He looks at the Romans and other times. But basically, the right side of the brain has its own existence, its own consciousness, its own take on the world, which is very holistic. It works incredibly rapidly. It gets things like body language, facial expression, and gets a kind of gestalt of the world. It gets an instant picture. And that is then fed over to the left hemisphere, who then decides what to do with it. And then eventually the right comes back into the picture, and you end up with some idea. And the right is so incredibly fast. I bet you've seen people who they think, this was a synchronicity. I was driving down the road and something came out in front of me, and had I not put the brakes on? No, that wasn't a synchronicity. That was your right hemisphere being extremely rapid at noticing something. It also is involved in making predictions. And that's one of the fundamental underlying problems in a lot of mental illness, as it is in a lot of our social problems. Our brain's making false predictions. And when the brain makes false predictions, it starts overproducing dopamine in the left hemisphere of the brain. Dopamine, unlike what you might read online, is not the pleasure chemical. It's actually involved in salience, deciding what's important in the environment. And why this matters so much is when the left hemisphere becomes dominant, which it has done, as Ian says, since the Enlightenment, and I think he's quite right about this one. It means we've been seeing the world quite wrongly. His first book was, or rather his second book, the big one on this topic, was called The Master and His Emissary. The idea being the master is the right hemisphere that's supposed to rule what happens in our worlds. The emissary was the left hemisphere, and it comes from an old story which has been told many, many times in different cultures. The idea of a master sends out his emissary to go and do some work for him, and eventually the emissary gets it into his head that he's the boss. And that's what's happened with us. And he cites a great, I mean, he calls his books bricks, and they're huge, great things, with all his evidence and many of the conclusions. But just one that may be very accessible to the audience today is the sudden rise in bureaucracy, which has gone completely bonkers. I have a good friend who was the president of the World Psychiatric Association. And after he did his stint, he was originally from London, did his stint when he came back from Switzerland. He went back to the Maudsley and had discovered in his time away that the amount of bureaucracy necessary in psychiatry was about 3 times greater than the time you could actually spend with a patient. And so now sessions would be 2 hours, 30 minutes patient time. The other 1.5 hours is filling out bloody old forms. And this would be a perfect example of left hemisphere dominance. So why has the left hemisphere become so dominant? Its perception, its way of looking at the world, because it's all about power. and it's about manipulation. And uh, I'll give you an example. What does the right hand do, which connects the left hemisphere? It grasps things, it manipulates things, it changes things. If you're a bird and you're sitting on the ground, you're pecking around, trying to decide, is that a bit of grit or is that a little seed that I can eat? You know, the way he does it is with his right eye, which connects to his left hemisphere, which enables him to sort things. Meanwhile, his left eye, which is connected to the right side, is scanning around to see, is that a predator? Is that one of my buddies? Is that the wife? Who's that? The two hemispheres normally have their own jobs. What's happened with us is that one hemisphere's got crazy and it's overdoing it. And I think that undoubtedly is part of it. And we'll come back to that, if I may, in just a second, because I think it's a helpful jumping off point for why on earth things have gone so badly wrong. And again, the left hemisphere is all about power. And if you think about what are some of the strongest ideas that developed and what have caused the biggest difficulties for us, there were three sets of ideas that developed in the 19th century. The first was Marx. The second of them was Herbert Spencer's view of Darwin. And the third was Sigmund Freud. Sorry, that was Freudian. Sigmund Freud.
Uh-oh, uh-oh.
You know, I'm teasing you. But why? Because although their ideas were incredibly important, all three of them in their different ways. And why I say Herbert Spencer, because Darwin never actually talked about the survival of the fittest. You know, it's one of those things, as you know, it's always talked about, but he finally introduced it in the last edition of one of his books from Herbert Spencer. So the three ideas were all of them materialist. They were all based on the idea that we are all victims. If you think Marx, you're victims of the class struggle. Darwin we're victims of this process that's been going on. We're just a bit of froth that appeared on the top of it. And Freud, that there's some bargain basement inside our heads that makes us do things. And all of them have this idea that ultimately it's all about power. And I think that is an important starting place, because if you wanted to ask me, what's our biggest problem that flows from this right-left thing, is we've forgotten our connection more than anything else. We all believe
our connection with each other and our connection with nature, particularly, and that is the connection that the right hemisphere helps make us keep.
That's right. That's absolutely right. It's spot on. That's the this whole idea. And also, what I liked was you just said nature, and you probably knew that you said it with a capital N.
I did.
And why, again, for the listeners, this is important, was Bernie and I are on the same page on this one, not everything, but on this one, we're on the same page. Because, you know, when we talk about Mother Nature, that's actually really important. It's very different from ecology, which is, again, a kind of bullet point way of handling things. Nature is actually an understanding about wholeness and about
Yes.
interaction.
Yeah, and that's where our right hemisphere helps us understand and connect with nature. And you're making that very clear. And part of what I'm hearing you say about the left hemisphere in control is what I've been able to document as the rise of global narcissism.
Yes, that undoubtedly is one factor, and I think I actually have a little list, and I won't bore your audience with it, of things that have interested me on what I have called internet thinking. It's more than just internet thinking, it's the change in thinking that's occurred. And I have over 60 things on my list of remarkable changes, which absolutely is what you're saying, but things like self-pity as a driving force in behavior, the idea of reinvention, rather than there are actually some real morals and there are some things that you're supposed to follow, and there are certain things that you aren't. And several people have noticed that we're living in a culture of utter illusion. We're the first culture in history that can live in illusions.
And the illusion that we're living in is what, Richard?
That everything is fungible, but you can change anything. And I'm sorry to have to break it to you, Bernie, but I do not believe that you could start being a ballroom dancer lady tomorrow. I think there are some restrictions. As much as you love dancing, I don't think that you could start doing the tango on Dancing with the Stars tomorrow. You know, there are some limitations, but people, I see people all the time who think that absolutely anything's possible.
Well, that brings us to the question of free will, which is
Yes,
out there a dominant idea that we have unlimited amount of free will, and there are so many constraints on what we can choose to become or even do in the moment that that gets ignored. And the other side of that is say we're helplessly defined by our destiny. In between is a range of possibilities, and that's where we're going, I think, Richard.
yes, yes, there are. And the idea that that anything is possible has become absolutely silly. And you know, I don't want to go down that particular rabbit
Well,
hole.
I can be, you can be anything that you want to be.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, yeah. Okay. It's well, I want to be a 20-year-old mega millionaire. How's that?
Well, you wanted to be a brilliant, multi-read guy who knows a lot of stuff, and you have become that. But that was within the constraints of your
Wh-
misspent
what-
youth.
That was my misspent and dissolute youth. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was, yes, there's still limits.
There
And
are limits, and that's what's important here that the left brain, or what I'm calling global narcissism, does not want to admit that we have limits. There is freedom in knowing what our limits are, because within that limit, with those limits, we can make effective choices.
and that also is effective choices because it's funny, I was just yesterday discussing with a group of people. I was doing something, and afterwards we were talking about some issues. And I had just recently been asked to do a consult on a woman who was very distressed because she couldn't find Mr. Right. And that was causing all kinds of problems. The
I
trouble
know that.
was
I know
that,
that one. Yes.
yeah, the trouble
I
was,
mean,
Bernie,
yeah, yeah.
and what was different is her non-negotiable list of Mr. Right ran to
Yes.
18 pages.
16. Oh, wow.
18
18.
pages of non-negotiables. And this educated person but couldn't see just how totally preposterous this was.
Well,
I
that's
mean,
just that's demonstrating how what I want is got to happen. That's part of this
yes,
manifestation idea that if I imagine it, it can happen, and the amount of limitations is not taken in consideration. And that's what you're saying in different ways. The left hemisphere and makes us think that we are the power and we can do anything that we want. And the
yes.
right hemisphere is a way of helping us understand our limitations globally by seeing where we stand among and between what we're involved with, where we are, nature and other people.
The right hemisphere is realistic. It sees the world as it is. The left hemisphere is happy to just believe anything can happen all the time. And again, there's a lot of very interesting material
Yeah,
that's related to,
and you know it well, and Ian McGilchrist, among other things, I have to mention that through David Lorimer, our mutual friend at the Scientific and Medical Network, was helped me communicate with Ian about
yes,
what trust was, and he wrote an article about trust, and who was emphasizing the right hemisphere's role in that knowing what trust was. And I was trying to say it's a very important thing to be able to have a feeling, let's say, of what trust with somebody could be, but I think there are ways of also thinking about it in rational ways and like left hemisphere ways, which include this person's not going to hurt me, this person is predictable, and this person is going to help me. And Ian's response was through David, haven't gotten past the first hurdle.
There's on this topic, and it was actually one of the things I wanted to bring up today a little bit about the synchronicity, its relationship to the future of humanity. And one of the things that comes up all the time is the so-called law of attraction.
Yes, all the
Some people
time. Yeah.
have talked about this. And one of the points I make, and I know that I infuriate some people, is to say that let's just think for a moment. If you took millions of some of the best educated people in the world and who are highly motivated, and you put them in camps with barbed wire around them, and they all knew that they were going to die, don't you think if the law of attraction really worked, that they'd blow the gates off?
That's right.
And so people don't want to hear that. And then the second thing is, well, okay, I knew somebody who would start every time there was a play on the football field in Philadelphia, she'd start crossing herself. And I said, well, what about all the people on the other team who are also crossing themselves? Who's going to win? And somehow this idea that you can create anything
is wrong. And I think we can establish that and describe the limits of our free will and our ability to imagine. I mean, one of the ideas that came from the book The Secret was you could lie in bed and imagine $1,000 bill on your ceiling, and that money would come. Not that there is $1,000 bill, but you could imagine it coming to you. And let's get past that, Richard, because
yes.
we have to do our imagination within what's possible, the restrictions that our global right brain can let us understand. So given that, let's stay that as established, that humanity, and I'm thinking of humanity as a collective human organism that is not very well functioning right now, that there are many limits right now, and you're describing many of them. What the left brain dominance is part of that. But how are you seeing the future now, given some of the ideas and information that you so articulately articulated? I tried to get that one out.
Oh,
But
well, you did a fine job.
thank you, Jared. Thank you, Richard.
I think because I do have a little list of things that I think we can, should, and need to be doing. But I think we also need to have a couple of understandings.
Uh-oh.
I think that, no, not really and truly. If I can follow up on the comments that I was making a moment ago about how people are changing.
Yes.
One of the things that I think is absolutely essential is to understand that we are not just changing physically, our jaws are changing, it's not just the rest of our bodies, but we're also developing new organs of perception. One of the things and one of the trainings that I've done over a period of many years now is actually to help people who are waking up spiritually. And the number who are waking up spiritually has been changing dramatically.
Yes.
I want to, for 30 years, 35 years now, I've asked people, how many people in this audience have ever healed somebody just using their hands? And well, back in the day, would have one or two hands going up. Now I normally get a forest if it's healthcare providers, because people have begun to discover this. They feel it more. And are they delusional? No, absolutely not. It's something that's happening. How many people have actually had an experience? I mean, that's why your work has been so valuable, because yes, synchronicity has been around forever. I personally don't believe it only happens with humans. I think it's happening in the world in general.
Yes.
But I think it's becoming more common.
Yes.
And I don't think it's just that we're noticing it more. I think it's becoming more common.
Yes.
And it has to do with the development of these organs. And I'm not the first person in history to say this. Other people have noticed that we seem to be seeing more people becoming psychic, more people developing other capacities. And I don't know about you, Bernie, but I have seen countless people who were not mentally ill. They were just waking up and they needed help because they didn't know how to handle all the new experiences they were having.
Yes, yes, yes.
And unfortunately, it's the easy way out for most people working in psychiatry is to say, oh, I'm sorry about that. Here's some Xanax. It'll do you the world of good. When, of course, it wouldn't. And what they actually need, and again, in a moment when I give my ideas about what we might be able to do to help, I think that ends up being a real big problem. Trying to put a Band-Aid on somebody who's waking up spiritually is huge. The next one, which is related, I think, is the problem of evil, because, and again, it was something that was discussed somewhat at this conference in London, and it's something that's exercised me for a very long time now, is whether evil is something that simply springs from the human heart or whether it's something else. And interestingly, the consensus view in London was that evil is actually a presence, a force. And one of the things, it was quite interesting at the end of one of the talks, there was a picture shown, you've probably seen it, called The High Hunt, which was painted by somebody called Franz von Stuck in 1889, the year that Adolf Hitler was born. And in the middle of the picture is Wotan, the old German god of
Uh-huh.
war. And he has,
Wotan, yeah.
yes, and he has the face of Adolf Hitler as an adult.
Wow.
Um, if you haven't seen it, I'll send you a picture of
Please
it,
do. Please do.
or you may want to put it on your website. It's very remarkable that it was that this not well-known artist painted it when he was born.
Wow.
And so I have tended very much to see evil as not just people being horrendously awful, but that evil is a force in the world. And I think that people make themselves available for it, and some people channel it. And some
Yeah.
of the most horrid people that we've come across. It was interesting having, for listeners that don't know, the Maudsley and the Bethlehem, which is the other part of the hospital, is widely regarded as one of the world centers for psychiatry. So all the big experts are there. And I will tell you, having spoken to innumerable forensic people and all sorts of psychiatrists, they will all tell you that sometimes they've seen things that are not mental illness. They're just bad. They're people that are just evil. We've seen it. And one of the problems, I think, that we have to confront with trying to help humanity is that there are these people. Why do they get into positions? They're charismatic and they're powerful. And they cause a lot of the problems that we are having to deal with every day. And there's a thing that I'm sure you've heard of called the Seneca effect, named for the Roman philosopher Seneca. Basically, what it means is it takes an awful long time to build things. It takes 1.5 minutes to break them. And a lot of these powerful, evil people did a lot of breaking.
Yeah.
And we saw how quickly things can change. But the other side of that, before I come to some of the ideas that have been occupying me about what to do, is I also have a certain optimism. Although I think the future is bleak unless we do something. How many people predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall?
Yeah.
When it happened? If I hadn't done what I'm doing now, I would have been an historian. And I've always been very interested in the currents of history, not just factoids, but how things change. And I don't think anybody predicted just how rapidly that would change. And I can name you 10 other things that nobody could work out any way that we could figure it out. In every case, it was what we started with Jung saying, that you don't solve problems, you outgrow them. And that's what happened in Eastern Europe, isn't it? I mean, when suddenly people said, no, I've had enough, we're not doing this. And it's going to happen elsewhere as well. But we need to give it a little bit of a prod and a help, in my opinion.
Yes, things it builds up and the change comes. And one of the things that I'd like to comment is the evil as a force. And I think it's important to recognize that those who embrace it or somehow channel it uh, are enlivened by it. It makes them feel good in their way. And they keep feeding off that energy, kind of like a vampire might in history, in fables, feed off the blood of another person. That energy eh, energizes them so that they continue doing what they are doing and have to keep building on it to make it happen. So to keep happening. So what you're describing as a future of humanity means recognizing, come to grips with the fact that evil is a force in the world that people embrace and take into themselves and then use to charge ahead to cause the Seneca effect, destroy things that have taken years to build.
I think it's essential because otherwise, we can all link arms and sing Kumbaya and hope for the best. And we've seen so many people in the New Age movement who just think if I sit here thinking beautiful thoughts, the world's going to be a much better
That's
place.
so true. That's so true. And then not enough to, and then there's nothing to do but that. That's right.
And I think that's very unfortunate. And, there's a phenomenon which I know you're very familiar with. Um, we see all the time of what's referred to as spiritual bypassing.
Yes.
I'm such a spiritual person. There's a spiritual answer to everything, and basically, I don't need to get my hands dirty. Uh, it's it's very interesting. It's like the difference between Hermeticism and Gnosticism. The Gnostics thought that the whole world was evil and horrible and needed to be escaped. The Hermetics actually said, no, we actually live in the world, and it's our job to bring spirit into the world and make it a better place. Um, so I'm actually in the Hermetic side of this.
Of course. Of course.
And I think you are too, which is
Yep.
why we're talking.
Yes.
But you can't just go wafting off and hope for the best. It's and but one of the things about that, and why before we get to potential solutions, um, is that if you actually look historically and in the traditions that have actually tried to give us some advice for the future, because after all, part of our job is to prepare other people in the future.
Yes.
Um, One of the things that I always find very striking in one of the systems that you know better than I do, the Lurianic Kabbalah, is that when Ein and then Ein Sof created the world, he didn't actually sort of push his hands out and say, let there be something. He actually withdrew. And there were left from his withdrawal 12 vessels. And he then shattered 8 of those vessels. And that began the creation. And the human is supposed to help, according again to the Lurianic Kabbalah, is supposed to help by rebuilding the shattered pots. That's supposed to be our role. I think it's a lovely image, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
And, but
It comes in the simple form of healing the world, but you're talking about the specifics of the shattered pots that Ein Sof cre- created what we now look at as the 10 Sephirot,
yes,
8 of which are what you talked about, and Kether being the top and beginning of the crown where that Ein Sof might be reached. But there's a lot of ways of talking about that as people have done for centuries. And what we're talking about is putting the shards together and somehow healing the world. And that's what I hope we're getting to now.
yes, I think so. I think, and why the preamble is so important is because we also have to understand that um, an image that a lot of people have been talking about is that we're developing more and more of a machine culture.
Yes.
And there's something, again, that you know, but perhaps not all your listeners and viewers know, is that there are actually no machines in nature apart from ones that have been created by human beings. None
Yes.
that we know of. I mean, there may be something in Alpha Centauri that we don't know. But in nature, machines don't exist. They're all processes.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of talking about the human body, the human mind, the human soul as machines is can best be described as bovine excreta. Um,
How
and
kind of you, Richard.
I don't want you being censored.
Thank you.
But no, seriously, uh, and it's important to grasp this, that these mechanical ideas are deadening. And, one of the worst things that you see in cultures that have been dominated by mechanical ideas, and I'm thinking here particularly of totalitarian societies, if you spend much time with them, is that they absolutely deaden everybody.
Yes.
That's the thing that you notice extraordinarily. In some countries, that's the way of doing things, but everything is dead. We know historically, and we both have people that survived Central Europe in 33 to 45. We know what it is in various cultures around the world where everything is deadened. And I think the number one thing on my list is always we have to regain our vitality.
Yeah.
That is, I've done a ton of work and I teach programs on how to increase your energy. And I think if you want to start with one thing, one of the main determinants of outcome in people is increase energy. And there's 101 ways of doing that, but just being aware of how you're being pushed down. And what's the best way to start regaining your vitality is what you were saying a little bit earlier, nature with a capital N. If you're in a place where it's possible, I want everybody to spend just a couple of minutes a day taking off their shoes and socks and standing on the grass. It doesn't need to be a big piece of grass. You may be in a city, there may be a tiny bit like that, but just doing it for a couple of minutes, spending just a moment or two round trees. Again, I think this is a huge thing that we can actually do with large numbers of people. It's not just one person at a time. And also related, but when I said trees, we teach very simple methods of grounding and earthing using trees, just leaning against them, being with them, being around them. For some listeners already know that Bernie, you've had some wonderful relationships with 2.5 trees over a period of time, and they've undoubtedly helped you, haven't they?
Oh, they have undoubtedly helped me become a better singer, among other things, because they are.
Please not.
I'm not going to, but they insist usually that I sing some songs, and they like some songs. But the relationship with them has been very important to me over the last decade. And so, yes, then I'm adding being able to hug trees, because being able to be next to the tree in a physical way allows you to inhale some of the chemicals that they are putting out into the air, which also helps your own vitality.
A trick that not all your listeners know. I know I've told you this one, Bernie, but not just hugging trees, because that makes you sound like a retired hippie there. But there's another technique, which is where you put your left hand against the bark of a tree. So you get up close to it, find a tree that you like and hopefully
Yes.
likes you, and you lean against it with your back to it. So put your hand against it, and then you put the other hand over your tummy, just below your belly button, and you lean back against the tree, close your eyes, and see if he or she will talk to you. And again, inhale what's coming off the tree, feel the electricity running through the tree, feel the energy that comes up from the ground and comes down. And I tell you, it's very remarkable. There's a hospital where we had a courtyard with 4 trees in it. And initially, everybody thought this was completely nuts. But we had inpatients who would go and do this simple technique every day. And some of them thought it did more than their medications, and I don't think they were wrong. So
Well,
it
that's new to me, and I hope our viewers and listeners keep this one in mind because it's a wonderful and simple thing to be able to do.
it, it's so simple. And I'm a great believer in uh, being able to do stuff that you can do quick and easy, and you don't need
Would you
to.
please say that over again, just in case somebody missed it?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if I can actually do it today, but it's a very simple technique. Yes, my camera's following me. That's good.
It is.
All we actually do is you take your left hand, you put it against the trunk of a tree, you lean against the tree, you put your right hand over your tummy, and you lean against the tree.
And
Close your eyes
is
and
your
breathe.
right hand, is it palm open or palm closed?
Palm, both of them palm open. So left hand against tree,
Okay.
palm against tummy. Okay?
So, and the left hand behind with that's
Left
touching the
hand
tree.
behind your lower back
Yeah, and
in the
it's
middle.
the back of your left hand that is touching the tree.
No, we'll try it again. It's the palm of your hand. So what you're doing is palm and palm.
Yeah, okay, that wasn't clear. Okay,
Yes,
now we
sorry.
got it.
No, clarify. I mean, that's what we're here for. I mean, we want to help the viewers and listeners. I mean, and if I'm not clear, I have sometimes been accused, and particularly since I went to London for that 1 day conference, my extremely southern wife said that afterwards I became completely incomprehensible. So she says, you talk really funny now. So if I'm not clear, then of course that's what you're here for, is to make sure I do clarify it. So
And you
simple.
just,
Palm against tree, palm against tummy.
I got it. That's what I thought would be, but I wanted to be clear. So we
Yes,
got that.
no, and yeah, it sounds so hokey, but it's like everything. Just try it for a couple of minutes, and if it doesn't work, fine, go and do something else, and say that RP, that's me, is a nut.
No,
But
it's
I can
you
assure you,
are a nut, but it's like we can establish that. But a nut with a lot of information to crack open on that nut and see that it's useful. So and then to also emphasize that patients who did that uh, in the psychiatric hospital with the trees locally right there were able to reduce or eliminate some medications.
yes, oh yeah,
That
that's right.
that's a profoundly easy way to make a measurement of an outcome.
There actually is a small but very interesting body of research on trees, the fields, and the effects they can have on people, and also of this whole principle of earthing and grounding.
Yeah.
Um, and there is published stuff that's out there, and some of it's of decent quality. So
Well,
some,
let's move on from that. I think we've
yes,
made that part
absolutely.
of it clear, and we have maybe 15 minutes left. So
Yes, I'm watching the clock up there, so I have my own timer here as well, so I'm
oh,
trying to keep an eye on it.
s- I'm glad you can tell time, but you need to be told that. Anyway, we'll leave that one again. It's like let's. There's a lot of negativity that you haven't told us about, but I'd like to hear what you see as positive for humanity. And it's one
Yes,
thing for us to go with the trees and make us somehow better, more energetic, more capable, to somehow also recognize that we've been left brain dominated and need, by doing that with the trees and being out there with capital N nature, we are going to do something very positive on our switch to back to the right hemisphere. But let's now go beyond just the self
yes,
improvement, which is part of spiritual bypassing. You can stay too much with making yourself somehow more something.
yes,
And yes, part of what I think of is a coincidence or synchronicity globally is the continuing reports increased of mystical experiences, which is a subset of being able to get the telepathic and other parapsychological experiences increasing. That's happening. And that's part of what the world is seeing, and if we keep attention on it. And that can be a clue for me about how we can outgrow, or to use Einstein's ideas, you can't change the way things are by doing the same things that got us there. We need new ways
Yeah.
of thinking, and that Jung comment about outgrowing is very consonant with that. So let's hear the positive from Richard Petty.
I think also one of the reasons I raised the tree and the grounding and earthing and so on at this point is I'm very firmly of the opinion that we can't think our way out of trouble. And that was, again, why I began with that little thing from alchemical studies. What we need to do more than anything is listen. We need to get better at listening to cosmic currents. I said I was interested in history and looking at changes in currents, rather than trying to force our opinions on we're going to do this because we think it's a really good idea. We're going to go off and do this. No, you need to figure out what you're supposed to be doing. And that requires listening. And in order to listen, you need to find somebody who will talk to you like you and your trees, or you need to get better at meditation or prayer or whatever in order to be able to listen to what's necessary.
Yes, yes.
And in my opinion, because I think that this and why it was apposite that you quoted that statement that's always attributed to Einstein. I don't even know if he actually said it, but it's a good statement. Whoever said it was smart.
Yes, yes.
And so I think that we have to also get much better at focusing on what's real and not on the distractions. And what I mean by that is, are there environmental problems? Yes, of course there are. You need to be foolish not to see that. But we suddenly find ourselves being told that it's because there's a climate crisis, when in fact, I would say that the big problem is we've lost touch with nature.
Yeah.
It's deracination. And I was yesterday, something I was doing, I was quoting a statement about how within 15 years, the ice caps would all be melted and the seas rising 30 feet and everything else horrible. And so everybody is nodding sagely. Yes, we all knew that's happening. And the statement was from 1969. And then, of course, people got upset. And the thing that's related to it is we also need to understand the limits, and why it gets back to the point you made about limitations, the limits of our adaptability. We are the most adaptable species that we know of, but there are things that have been happening that have gone beyond what we can do. In 1805, the average American ate 7 pounds of sugar a year. In 1905, it was 60 pounds. The last year for which we have figures, it's about 150. That means the average American is eating half a pound of sugar a day. And that amount of sugar is having dramatic impacts on our cognition. It's changing the microbiome, and by changing the microbiome, that's changing our mood. And it's also changing our ability to interact with other people.
Yeah.
And so that's something we need to think about. We need to think about pollution as something which is not just plastic in the sea and misquoted studies. Did you see the study recently where it talked about how we'll have plastic, microplastic in our brains? It was all over
Yes.
the internet.
Yes. Yes.
You know, it wasn't right. In the study, they hadn't actually been able to tell the difference between plastic and ceramide. Ceramide is a fat that's inside the brain. But it was a great story. How many conversations everybody had, oh, we're all dying. Do I think microplastics are a problem? Yes, I do. But let's find studies that are actually true.
Okay. So there's a lot of there's so much scare going on about taking care of yourself, and we don't know what's true. That's part of the whole issue of being bombarded by information and stuff that isn't information but sounds credible. And the ability to critically think about what we're being told is a major problem. But
It's gone. Yeah.
let's, and you, more than anybody I know, Richard, are a critical thinker, uh, in both senses of the term. Uh, which is why I don't like the name critical thinking, because it implies the other side of it, which is the critic. It's always, we have inner critics. So the words the words we use are really, really important as part of the future, because Humpty Dumpty was into, like, the words can mean what I want them to mean, and which critical are we talking about when we're talking about critical thinking becomes just an illustration, as is awakening, which you've mentioned. It has a lot of different meanings. I do it every day. Uh, I awaken. And so there's a lot of varieties to that, but you mean
Yeah.
spiritually awakening, and we don't know what we mean by spiritual. I could go on about consciousness and awareness being words that float around out there, and they don't have any antecedent or connection or object. But that's a word problem, which I know you and I could have a tennis match playing with, but I still want to see. Do you have any imaginings about what humanity can be, given the
Yes.
many limitations that you are so able to tell us?
We need to re-embody our souls. Um, by which I mean we need to get our souls back into our bodies. One of the things, Bernie, that you have done for years is you've kept on dancing.
Yes.
You've done physical things. And one of the things about the spiritual bypassing is that people are often perfectly happy to leave their bodies behind and let them get unhealthy and so on. But in actual fact, in the traditions, um, one of the important things is that this is a temple that you're supposed to look after.
Yeah.
And that also
Yeah.
means that you're supposed to embody.
Yeah.
And um, it's interesting because we always assume that some people have souls, um, and then everybody's supposed to have a soul. Again, in the traditions, a lot of people have said, and I believe this to be true, is that you keep your soul and it carries on if you've actually nurtured it. If you do nothing, it just evaporates like fairy dust when you pass on. Um, so how do we actually do that? Um, I think it's terribly important to start off just understanding that there is more to us that we can control. There's something that's greater than us than we know or can know. Um, Part of that narcissism that you mentioned a moment ago, um, a little while ago, you were involved with a whole day seminar on synchronicity, I remember, and there was somebody who was citing a particular teacher, um, an Indian teacher, who recently was doing a whole program on line where it was how to make God your slave, which I thought was okay. Um, when I hear all the time people saying, "What should I do?" My view is not what should we do, it's how should we be? And we need a fundamental change in our rhythm and perspective. And the first of that is to develop a sense of wonder and awe.
Yeah. And
Um,
acceptance of mystery,
yes,
and uncertainty, I would add.
it was very interesting having got to pretty much the top of the tree in internal medicine and all of that. When I went over to the Maudsley, because I was finally working out an escape route here, I went to see a very famous psychiatrist called Alan Lishman, who is a lovely man. And he said to me when we were just having a sort of fireside chat, he said, can you handle ambiguity? He said, you've come from a world where you everything is cut and dried and done, and you've got pretty damn good at that. How can you deal with ambiguity? And I had some smart aleck response to it about that's an ambiguous question, but he was right. We need to understand that there are things we can't control, You cannot make God your slave, and that there's something more than us. But it's extremely hard for most of us now to get into the habit of going, oh my goodness, there really is something extraordinary.
Yeah.
The first time um, I had a lot of trouble when I first came to the States because I didn't find anything sacred. And I'd grown up in Europe where there's sacred stuff everywhere. It's been there for thousands of years. And I'd had one experience some years earlier in Muir Woods. And the first time that I actually saw the giant redwoods, I suddenly
Uh-huh.
thought, this is like being in a cathedral.
Yeah,
The
it
second
is.
time, and you'll know where this is because of where you're from originally. Um, I hadn't long been in the US. We were doing a research project up in the Poconos, and I had to drive up there, and it was October. And there's a tunnel you go through north of Philadelphia, and you suddenly are in the Poconos, and the trees were changing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen in Europe because of the Gulf Stream. There's no such thing. And I remember I was just physically breathless, and I stopped the car and got out and just went like this and said, "There really is a God." And that's what I mean. It doesn't need to be something else, but it's something that changes you like that. And I think, just understanding that concepts like love with a capital L, beauty with a capital B, and goodness with a capital G um, are actually cosmic principles in the same way that evil is a presence, so is love, beauty, and goodness. And we need to embrace those. And all you actually need to do is spend a very small amount of time every day embracing them. I've got a very simple principle because a lot of stuff comes my way all the time. Um, would I like to look at this movie clip? Would I like to look at this? But suppose, and my principle is very straightforward. Unless it actually um, enlivens, makes me feel better, I ain't going to do it.
Yeah.
um, and you need to just everybody be a little bit more aware of yourself and your own responses. It's very easy to get hung up on very simple things. So something I do all the time is I try to have a little bit of regularity in life as much as I can with my life. And um, I don't change what I have for breakfast. And you're going to say, why? But wouldn't you like to try something else? Yeah, but I don't want to actually be spending time wasting at the beginning of the day on, do I want to have oatmeal? I want to just, no, I want to notice other things. So first thing, I always try to go outside, whatever the weather. Well, it's easier because I grew up in England where it rains all the time. So, but whatever the weather, go out and just experience. We all need to do that. And we need to get larger numbers of people doing it together. Because the last thing is, what is it about the right and left hemispheres? It's about the quality of their attention. What we put attention on is what changes us.
Yes.
One of the things in therapy, and we both know this, um, is one of the underlying difficulties in a lot of mental illness, a lot of disturbance, distress, is what I call uh, attentional misperceptions, that people are actually pointing their attention at the wrong things.
Yes.
And we spend half our time actually bringing them back to something else. There's a question that we often ask in therapy and is worth every healthy person listening to ask, what is it in your life that is working and what is not working? And what we mean is, what's your state of being in the world? And what's causing you to be here today?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the things that have made you be this way? And if you're feeling good and healthy and everything's ticking over, that's great. Why? And if it's not, then let's figure out what it is. And it's all about fixing your attention. How else can I improve attention? Well, there are things that you can do to wreck your attention, so don't do them. Some of them are pretty obvious, but they also include things like food. There's a thing that I have been talking about a great deal, and I don't know, Bernie, if I sent you, there's a video I did about using food as an add-on treatment in psychiatry, because there are things, if you start eating, I want you to start noticing what you eat and the effect it has on you.
Yeah.
and just simple stuff like that. So, quick thing, regain our vitality, re-embody your soul, get a sense of awe and wonder, know that love, beauty, and goodness are real things, as is evil, and put your attention on things that matter and make you feel good. And if you do that, you start affecting people around you. If you affect people around you, it affects everyone.
All right. Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end our conversation on, Richard. And it's it's just so great listening to how smart you are, besides what content you have, which is also important. So thank you for the real privilege of being able to have my mind resonating for this period of time with your excellent mind and your excellent heart. As much as you hide it, it's kind of there, and I can get it, but your intellect tends to overshoot my experience of your warm-heartedness and your lovingness, which I know is there too. And I hope some of our audience, as I do, can feel some of that from you, because that's an important part of whatever you might call the right hemisphere. It's part of our ensoulment. It's part of becoming part of our bodies to be able to radiate the love that you have in you so other people can also feel it.
Thank you very much, Bernie. As always, it's been a great pleasure to speak to you, and I hope we'll speak soon.
Yeah, me too.